She is on the ground, not falling, not hurt, kneeling on purpose, legs crossed, right there on the blue track at Icon Stadium, seconds after the fastest race of her season. The scream is still hanging in the New York air. She has just beaten every woman in the country over 100 meters, and instead of standing tall for the cameras, she drops to the surface like she needs to feel it under her palms. A stopwatch reads 10.77. For most sprinters, that number would be a career highlight. For her, it is a receipt, proof of something she has spent nearly 2 years trying to prove to everyone, including herself. This is the story of how SHA'CARRI Richardson got back to that track, and why a single silver watch reading in New York carries more weight than any gold medal she has ever won. To understand why this moment mattered, you have to go back to a hallway in Oregon, 5 years earlier, where a positive drug test for marijuana cost her a place on the biggest stage in the sport. The Tokyo Olympics happened without her. The world moved on, filled her seat with other names, other stories. But Richardson did not disappear. She trained in silence while the sport speculated about whether she was finished before she had truly started. Her return to competition came at a Diamond League meet, where she finished dead last, an image the internet was more than happy to freeze and repeat. It looked, to a casual observer, like an ending. It was not. 2 years later in Budapest, she stepped into the blocks at the World Championships with a chip on her shoulder the size of a continent. She ran 10.65 seconds, a time that would have made her a legend in almost any era of women's sprinting. And she took the world title in her first appearance on that stage. It was vindication delivered at full speed. The girl who had been written off as a cautionary tale had just become a world champion, and the same voices that mocked her exit now scrambled to explain her arrival. The following year brought the moment every American sprinter dreams about and few ever reach, an Olympic final in Paris, under lights that make legends out of ordinary nights. She crossed the line in second place, an Olympic silver medal around her neck, and added a gold in the 4x100 meter relay for good measure. 2 national titles were already hers by this point. She had won the U.S. Championship in 2023 and again in 2024, and it looked, from the outside, like an uninterrupted climb. Champion, Olympic silver medalist, reigning face of American track and field. There was no reason to expect anything but more of the same. Then, 2025 happened, and it tested her in a completely different way. An injury in February delayed the start of her season before it had even begun. When she finally raced, the results told a story that had nothing to do with talent and everything to do with a body fighting its own limits. A 4th-place finish at a meet where she was expected to dominate. A 9th-place result at a Diamond League stop that used to be a showcase for her dominance. Whispers started again, the same kind that followed her out of Tokyo years earlier, except this time there was no positive test to point to, no clean villain for the narrative, just a champion visibly struggling to be herself. She made the World Championship team anyway, which in itself said something about her resilience, but Tokyo in September told a harder truth. She finished 5th in the final, clocking 10.94 seconds, behind a training partner who ran a championship record to claim the title Richardson had defended a year earlier. It was the kind of result that ends careers in the public imagination even when the athlete has no intention of ending anything. She posted a message afterward that read less like a retirement notice and more like a promise. 2025, she said, owed her nothing. She was thankful for what the year had revealed. There was more coming, she wrote, and fans would not have to wait long to see it. Here is the part of the story where most narratives take a breath, and where this one refuses to. Because what came next was not a slow rebuild. It was a full sprint back to the top, run in a matter of months. If you have ever wondered what separates athletes who fade after a setback from the ones who come back stronger, stick around, because the next few minutes show you exactly what that difference looks like in real time. And if a story about turning a brutal year into a statement season is the kind of thing you want more of, this is the channel for it. Hit subscribe now, because the reveal of just how fast her comeback actually happened is still ahead. 2026 opened with a different energy around her name. Instead of chasing form, she seemed to be rediscovering it on her own terms, race by race, meet by meet, building toward a target that everyone in the sport had circled on their calendars. The U.S. Outdoor Championships in New York City, the meet that would decide who represented the nation on the world stage, and the meet where her third national title was sitting there unclaimed, waiting to see if she could take it back. The preliminary round in July gave the first real signal that something had shifted. Richardson looked untroubled, running 10.90 in the opening heats, the fastest time of any competitor across all four groups. It was not a time that would win a final by itself, but it was the kind of number that quiets doubt. She was through to the championship round in the smoothest possible fashion, and for the first time in what felt like a long stretch, the conversation around her name was about what she might do next, not what had gone wrong. Two of the biggest stars in American sprinting were set to share the same stage that Friday night in New York, both chasing the exact same milestone. Noah Lyles, the reigning face of the men's sprint program, was also gunning for a third national 100-meter title of his own, and both of them had spent 2025 fighting through injuries that threatened to derail their momentum entirely. The stadium, despite its marquee names, was less than half full that evening, a strange contrast to the magnitude of what was about to happen on the track, as if the crowd hadn't quite caught up to how much was riding on 8 seconds. Richardson's final did not start the way legends usually script it. Kayla White, her training partner and closest rival that night, got out fast, taking an early lead through the first half of the race. For a moment, it looked like White might be the one riding the headline. But then, in the same final 30 meters where Richardson has built her entire identity as a competitor, something clicked. She began closing the gap with the kind of controlled violence that made her famous in Budapest. Not a desperate lunge, but a rising, gathering surge that ate up the track one stride at a time. By the line, she had done it again. 10.77 seconds. A season's best. Her third national championship in the 100 meters, joining her titles from 2023 and 2024. She did not stop at the finish line. She kept running, turning the sprint into a victory lap before the race had technically finished being a race, letting out a scream that had nothing rehearsed about it. Then she circled back toward the crowd and took a bow, an old-school gesture from a sprinter who has never been shy about theater when the moment calls for it. White crossed second in 10.90, her own season best, proof that the whole final had been run at a genuinely elite level and not simply handed to Richardson by a weak field. Minutes later, on the same track, Lyles matched his own personal best to claim his third national title as well, a symmetry that made the entire night feel less like a single race and more like a changing of the guard, or perhaps more accurately, a reclaiming of thrones that had briefly gone empty. Two American sprinters, both battered by the same injury-riddled year, both standing on the same podium months later as national champions again. What makes Richardson's 10.77 especially remarkable is where it sits inside her own timeline. It was not a career best time, and it was not meant to be. Her personal best from Budapest still sits faster, at 10.65, but this run mattered for a different reason entirely. It was the second time this season she had hit exactly that mark, meaning the performance was not a fluke or a lucky wind reading. It was a repeatable standard, a sign that her body had finally caught up with her ambition again after a year of betraying her at the worst possible moments. Sitting on the track afterward, cross-legged, catching her breath in front of the cameras, she gave the kind of answer that explained everything the stopwatch could not. She said it felt phenomenal to be back in a better place, healthy, mentally, physically, and emotionally. She said hard work pays off. It was a simple sentence, almost understated given everything that had led to it, but for anyone who had watched her stumble through 2025, It landed like the closing line of a much longer story. And in some ways, it was. Because the arc from that fifth-place finish in Tokyo to this scream on the track in New York is not just a comeback story in the way sports networks like to package them for highlight reels. It is a study in what happens when an athlete refuses to let one broken season define an entire career. Richardson had every excuse to let 2025 be the year that quietly ended her run at the top. Instead, she used it as the floor she pushed off from. There is a version of this story where the injuries in 2025 become the headline forever, where she becomes a cautionary tale about promise interrupted, filed away next to a dozen other athletes who never quite recovered their prime form. Richardson made sure that was not the version that got written. She turned a season that could have broken her narrative into a single chapter inside a much larger one, and in doing so, reminded everyone watching exactly why she became must-see television in the first place. Not because she is undefeated, but because she refuses to stay down. She is not done either. With Melissa Jefferson Wooden, the reigning world champion and her own training partner, sitting out the 100 meters at these nationals to focus purely on the 200, the door is still open for Richardson to chase down bigger targets later in the season, including a possible showdown against the current Olympic and world champions on a different stage entirely. The third national title in New York was not a finish line. It was a checkpoint, delivered with a scream and a bow, on a comeback that is clearly still writing itself. If this is the kind of sports story that hooks you, the falls, the doubt, the refusal to quit, and the receipts delivered on the biggest stage possible, this channel exists for exactly that. We tell these stories properly, with the context that turns a stopwatch reading into something you actually feel. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one, because there are more comebacks like this one waiting to be told. So here's the question worth sitting with. After everything 2025 put her through, was this New York performance the true return of SHA'CARRI Richardson at her absolute best, or is the real headline still ahead of her? Drop your take in the comments. I want to know who you think she has to beat next to prove it for good.